the descent into obsession. There is a moment when desire crosses a threshold, when what began as wanting transforms into something darker, more consuming, more total. In that moment, we cease to possess the desire possesses us. It becomes the center around which our entire existence orbits, the lens through which all experience is filtered, the hunger that can never be satisfied yet can never be abandoned. This is obsession, and it is one of the most misunderstood and most dangerous states of the human psyche. We speak casually of being obsessed with a hobby, a show, a song, but true obsession is not enthusiasm. It is not passion. It is a form of psychological possession, a hijacking of consciousness so complete that the person can no longer distinguish between themselves and the object of their obsession. Freud understood that obsession reveals something hidden, something we cannot face directly, and so must approach sideways, through repetition, through fixation, through the endless circling of a wound we cannot acknowledge. Jung saw in obsession the shadow made manifest, the denied aspects of ourselves demanding recognition through compulsive attachment to external objects. What drives a person to destroy their life, pursuing something they know will never satisfy them? What makes the gambler return to the table despite bankruptcy? What keeps the rejected lover obsessing over someone who will never return their affection? What transforms creative ambition into self-destructive perfectionism? These questions point to something fundamental about human psychology, about how desire works, about the thin line between healthy attachment and pathological fixation. Obsession is desire that has gone mad, that has lost all proportion, all balance, all connection to reality. But it is also a window into the soul, revealing what we truly are beneath the civilized surface, showing us the raw hunger that civilization teaches us to hide. The nature of obsession, psychological foundations. To understand obsession, we must first distinguish it from ordinary desire. Desire is natural, adaptive, necessary for survival. We desire food when hungry, rest when tired, connection when lonely. These desires arise, are satisfied, and recede. They have a natural rhythm, a beginning and an end. But obsession has no end. It is desire that has become circular, feeding on itself, growing stronger through its own frustration. The key characteristic of obsession is that it survives and even thrives on non-satisfaction. Normal desire diminishes when it cannot be fulfilled. We want something, we cannot have it, eventually we move on. But obsessive desire intensifies through denial. The gambler who loses does not lose the desire to gamble. The loss makes the desire stronger, more urgent, more desperate. The rejected lover does not stop loving through rejection. The rejection makes the beloved more precious, more necessary, more impossible to release. This paradox is central to understanding obsession. It is not about the object at all. The gambler is not really pursuing money. The obsessed lover is not really pursuing the beloved. They are pursuing something else, something internal, something that the external object has come to represent. The object is a symbol, a stand-in for a psychological need so deep and so denied that it can only be approached indirectly. Freud called this displacement. We displace our real need onto an object that we can pursue, because the real need is too frightening to face directly. What appears to be obsession with a person is often obsession with being worthy of love. What appears to be obsession with achievement is often obsession with proving oneself valuable. What appears to be obsession with substances is often obsession with escaping unbearable inner states. The obsessive person is trapped in what psychologists call a repetition compulsion. They repeat the same pattern again and again, seeking a different outcome but generating the same result. The pattern is not random. It is an attempt to master something that was once overwhelming, to gain control over something that once left them powerless. But the attempt fails precisely because it is indirect, because it approaches the real issue through a substitute. Consider the person obsessed with a romantic partner who does not return their feelings. On the surface, this seems irrational. Why pursue someone who has clearly rejected you? But the obsession is not really about that person. It is about something that person represents. Perhaps they represent the parent who never gave approval. Perhaps they represent the proof of worthiness that was always denied. Perhaps they represent the fantasy of being loved in a way that would heal all wounds. The object of obsession becomes a screen onto which we project our deepest needs and our most desperate hopes. We imbue it with magical properties. If only I could have this, everything would be okay. If only I could achieve this, I would finally be enough. If only I could win this person's love, I would finally be worthy. The object becomes the solution to an existential problem, the key that will unlock meaning, value, wholeness. But this is an illusion. No external object can provide what we are truly seeking, because what we are truly seeking is internal. Self-acceptance, integration of denied parts of ourselves, resolution of ancient wounds, freedom from shame. The obsessive pursuit of external objects is a flight from internal work, a way of avoiding the painful truth that the problem and the solution both lie within. Obsession also serves a function. It organizes consciousness. It gives life a focal point, a purpose, a structure. The obsessed person always knows what they want, always knows what they should be doing. There is a terrible clarity in obsession, a simplification of existence that can feel like relief. Without the obsession, they would face the void, the question of who they are and what their life means. The obsession answers that question, however pathologically. This is why obsessions are so difficult to abandon. They are not simply bad habits or irrational attachments. They are psychological structures that serve a purpose, that protect against something worse. The person who gives up their obsession without addressing its underlying function often simply transfers the obsession to a new object. The gambler becomes an obsessive exerciser. The substance abuser becomes obsessed with sobriety. The form changes, but the structure remains. Obsession and the shadow, what we cannot release. Jung understood that obsession involves a possession by what he called a complex, an autonomous splinter of psyche that has broken off from conscious control. The complex has its own energy, its own agenda, its own perspective. When activated, it takes over consciousness, and the person becomes identified with it. They are no longer a person who gambles. They are a gambler. They are no longer a person who loves someone. They are that love, that longing, that desperate need. This possession happens because something in the psyche has been denied, split off, pushed into the unconscious. But what is pushed down does not disappear. It gains power in the darkness. It demands recognition. And when consciousness will not give it attention directly, it seizes attention through obsession, forcing the person to focus on something, anything, to fill the void left by the denied truth. The mechanism of obsession is therefore always compensatory. It compensates for something missing, something denied, something that consciousness refuses to acknowledge. The person obsessed with cleanliness is often unconsciously struggling with feelings of inner contamination or shame. The person obsessed with control is often defending against terror of chaos or powerlessness. The person obsessed with being loved is often defending against the belief that they are fundamentally unlovable. Obsession is the psyche's way of screaming for attention, of demanding that we look at what we refuse to see. But because we approach it through displacement, through fixation on external objects, we never address the real issue. We treat the symptom while ignoring the disease, and so the obsession perpetuates, growing stronger, becoming more consuming, until it dominates life entirely, or until we finally turn inward and face what we have been fleeing. The mechanism of obsession, how desire becomes compulsion. The transformation from desire to obsession does not happen suddenly. It is a gradual process, a slow descent that the person rarely recognizes until they are already trapped. Understanding this mechanism is crucial because it reveals the pathway into obsession and therefore hints at the pathway out. It begins with what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement. The object of desire sometimes satisfies, sometimes does not. This unpredictability is psychologically potent. B. F. Skinner discovered that behaviors reinforced on an intermittent schedule are far more resistant to extinction than those reinforced consistently. The gambler wins occasionally. The obsessed lover receives occasional attention from their beloved. The perfectionist occasionally achieves the standard they seek. These intermittent successes create a powerful psychological hook. The brain learns that satisfaction is possible but unpredictable. This activates the dopamine system not when the reward is received but in anticipation of it. The uncertainty itself becomes rewarding. The person becomes addicted not to the object but to the pursuit, to the hope, to the moment before they know whether they will succeed or fail. This is why obsessions intensify through frustration rather than diminishing. Each failure is interpreted not as evidence that pursuit is futile, but as evidence that the next attempt might succeed. Neuroscience has revealed that obsessive states involve dysregulation of the circuits connecting the orbital frontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the basal ganglia. These regions normally work together to evaluate goals, select appropriate behaviors, and inhibit inappropriate ones. But in obsession, this system becomes locked in a loop. The orbital frontal cortex detects that something is wrong, generating anxiety. The anterior cingulate tries to resolve this by initiating corrective action, but the action does not resolve the underlying anxiety, because the anxiety is not really about the external situation. It is about something internal, something the person cannot consciously access. And so the loop repeats: check the door again, contact the person again, place another bet, pursue the goal with more intensity. Each repetition provides temporary relief from anxiety but does not address its source. The relief is brief, and the anxiety returns, demanding another cycle. Over time, the neural pathways become entrenched. The behavior becomes automatic, no longer requiring conscious decision. The person is no longer choosing to obsess. The obsession is choosing them. This mechanism explains why rational arguments are ineffective against obsession. Telling the obsessed person that their behavior is irrational, that the object of obsession will never satisfy them, that they are destroying their life. All of this is true but irrelevant. They already know it. The obsession is not maintained by false beliefs about the external world. It is maintained by the internal function it serves, by the anxiety it temporarily relieves, by the void it fills. The psychoanalyst Melanie Klein understood that obsession often involves what she called part-object relations. The person relates not to whole, complex, real objects, but to fantasized partial objects that represent specific needs or fears. The obsessed lover does not love the real person with all their complexity and imperfection. They love an idealized fantasy, a projection of their own need. When the real person fails to match this fantasy, the obsessed person does not abandon the fantasy. They simply intensify their efforts to make the real person conform to it. This is why obsession so often involves denial of reality. The gambler denies the statistical certainty of loss. The obsessed lover denies clear signals of disinterest or rejection. The person with an eating disorder denies the physical damage they are causing. Reality becomes subordinate to the internal need that the obsession serves. The person constructs an alternative reality in which the obsession makes sense, in which satisfaction is always just around the corner, in which the next attempt will finally succeed. French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan spoke of objet pétia, the object cause of desire, which is not the actual object we pursue but something that object represents, and something forever beyond reach because it does not actually exist in reality. We pursue the object, believing it will satisfy us. But satisfaction is impossible because what we really seek is not the object but the fantasy it represents, and fantasy by definition cannot be made real. The mechanism of obsession also involves what is called cognitive fusion. The person becomes fused with their obsessive thoughts. They do not have the thought that they need to check the door. They are that need. They do not think about the person they are obsessed with. They are the obsession. There is no distance, no perspective, no space between the self and the obsessive content. This fusion makes the obsession feel not like a symptom, but like identity itself. Breaking this fusion requires developing what psychologists call metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own mental processes, to recognize thoughts as thoughts rather than as reality. But obsession actively resists this awareness. It demands total identification. To step back and observe the obsession is experienced as a threat to the self, because the obsession has become the self. The existential dimension is crucial here. Obsession fills the void of meaning. In a world where traditional sources of meaning, religion, community, clear social roles have eroded, obsession provides structure. It tells you what to do, what to care about, what matters, even if what matters is destructive, even if it is consuming your life. At least it is something. The terror beneath many obsessions is not the fear of not getting what you want. It is the fear of having nothing to want, no organizing principle, no answer to the question of what your life is for. This explains why treating obsession by simply removing the object or behavior often fails. Take away the gambling, the substance, the person, and you leave the obsessive structure intact with nothing to attach to. The person either finds a new object or collapses into the void the obsession was defending against. Effective treatment must address not just the behavior but the underlying emptiness, the denied needs, the unintegrated parts of self that the obsession both expresses and conceals. Obsession and identity. The existential dimension. Søren Kierkegaard wrote about the despair of infinitude, a state where the self loses its finitude, its boundaries, and becomes lost in endless possibility, or in this case, in endless pursuit of an impossible object. Obsession is a form of this despair. The obsessed person has lost the ability to accept limitation, to accept that some desires cannot be fulfilled, that some people will not love us, that some goals are beyond reach, that we must choose one path and therefore relinquish others. The obsessed person refuses finitude. They insist that if they just try harder, if they just find the right strategy, if they just persist long enough, they can overcome the limits that constrain ordinary humans. This refusal is not confidence. It is a flight from the existential reality of limitation, from the fact that we are finite beings in a world that does not bend to our will, that does not care about our needs, that offers no guarantees. Jean-Paul Sartre understood that we are condemned to be free, condemned to create meaning in a meaningless universe. But this freedom is terrifying. It means nothing is given, nothing is guaranteed. We must choose without certainty. Obsession is a flight from this freedom. It provides certainty, even if that certainty is destructive. The obsessed person knows what they must do. They are not free to choose. They are compelled. And this compulsion, paradoxically, feels like relief. But the relief is false. By fleeing freedom into obsession, the person has not escaped anxiety but intensified it. They have created a situation where their entire sense of self depends on something external, something they cannot control. The gambler's worth depends on the next hand. The obsessed lover's value depends on whether the beloved responds. The perfectionist's acceptability depends on whether they achieve the impossible standard. They have made their being contingent on something perpetually uncertain. This is what Sartre called bad faith, the denial of our fundamental freedom, the pretense that we are determined by forces outside ourselves, when in reality we are always choosing, always responsible. The obsessed person says, I cannot help myself. I am driven by forces beyond my control. But this is a lie we tell ourselves to escape the burden of freedom. You are choosing the obsession, moment by moment. because the alternative, facing the freedom and the void, is more terrifying than the suffering the obsession causes. Nietzsche saw in obsession a failure of amor fati, the love of fate, the acceptance of what is. The obsessed person cannot accept reality. They cannot accept that they lost, that they were rejected, that they failed, that the world is not as they need it to be. And so they remain frozen in denial, endlessly attempting to undo what has already happened, to make reality conform to their need rather than adapting themselves to reality. This is the fundamental existential failure of obsession. It is a refusal to mourn. When we lose something, when a desire cannot be fulfilled, the psychologically healthy response is mourning. We acknowledge the loss, we feel the pain, we gradually release our attachment, and eventually we move forward. But the obsessed person will not mourn. They will not accept the loss. They insist that what is lost can still be regained, that what is over is not over, that what is impossible is merely difficult. This refusal to mourn is a refusal to live in time. Healthy human existence involves accepting that the past is past, that we cannot change what has happened, that we must live in the present and move into an open future. But obsession freezes time. The obsessed person lives perpetually in the moment before the loss, endlessly attempting to prevent what has already occurred, to win what has already been lost, to achieve what has already proven impossible. Martin Heidegger spoke of being toward death, the authentic acknowledgement that we are finite beings who will die, and this acknowledgement is what allows us to live authentically, to make choices that matter because time is limited. But the obsessed person lives as if they have infinite time, as if they can pursue the impossible object forever, as if there are no other demands on their existence, no other possibilities calling for attention. They have collapsed their entire being into a single point, a single desire, and in doing so have lost the richness and complexity that authentic human existence requires. The obsession becomes totalizing. It is not simply one part of life. It becomes the organizing principle around which all else revolves. Relationships are maintained or discarded based on whether they support or threaten the obsession. Work, health, responsibilities all become secondary. The person may continue to go through the motions, but they are not really present. They are always thinking about the object of obsession, planning the next pursuit, rehearsing past failures, fantasizing about future success. This totalization creates a kind of living death. The person is technically alive, but not truly living. They are going through existence on autopilot, while their real attention, their real energy, their real self is locked in the obsessive loop. This is what philosophers call alienation, a state of being estranged from one's own life, of existing at a distance from one's own experience, of having become a stranger to oneself. The tragedy is that obsession promises the opposite. It promises intensity, meaning, purpose. It promises to make life matter, to give existence a point, but it delivers only narrowing, only impoverishment, only the gradual erosion of everything that makes life rich and worth living. In pursuing the one thing obsessively, we lose everything else. And often we lose even the capacity to recognize what we have lost. The existential question at the heart of obsession is therefore, will you choose life in its fullness, with all its uncertainty and limitation and loss, or will you choose the illusion of control and certainty that obsession offers, even though that illusion costs you your freedom, your presence, your authentic being? This is not a question that can be answered abstractly. It must be answered through how we live, through the choices we make moment by moment about where we place our attention, what we pursue, what we are willing to release. The neuroscience of obsessive states. Modern neuroscience has begun to map the neural architecture of obsession, and what we discover confirms what depth psychology has long understood. Obsession is not simply a failure of willpower or a moral weakness. It is a specific pattern of brain activity, a neurological state with identifiable characteristics that help explain why obsessions are so difficult to escape. The primary neural circuit involved in obsession is the cortico-striatal thalamic cortical loop. In healthy functioning, this circuit allows us to select goals, initiate actions toward those goals, evaluate outcomes, and flexibly adjust our behavior based on feedback. But in obsessive states, this circuit becomes dysregulated. The orbital frontal cortex, which normally helps us evaluate whether our goals are appropriate and our strategies are working, sends persistent error signals. Something is wrong, something needs to be fixed, something is not right. These error signals generate intense anxiety, a sense of incompleteness, a feeling that something must be done. The anterior cingulate cortex, which is involved in conflict monitoring and decision-making, tries to resolve this anxiety by initiating corrective action. But because the anxiety is not really about the external situation, the corrective action does not resolve it. The anxiety persists, generating more error signals, demanding more corrective action, creating a self-perpetuating loop. Brain imaging studies of people with obsessive-compulsive disorder show hyperactivity in these regions. The brain is working overtime, constantly detecting problems, constantly initiating solutions, but never achieving resolution. This is not metaphorical. The neural activity is measurable, visible on fMRI scans. The obsessed brain is a brain that cannot rest, that cannot achieve the sense of completion that allows healthy brains to move on to other concerns. The neurotransmitter systems involved in obsession are equally revealing. Serotonin dysregulation is central to obsessive states. Serotonin normally helps regulate mood, anxiety, and the ability to shift attention flexibly between different concerns. When serotonin function is impaired, the brain becomes stuck, unable to disengage from particular thoughts or behaviors. This is why selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors are often effective in treating obsessive conditions. They do not eliminate the obsessive thoughts, but they reduce their intensity and make it easier for the person to disengage from them. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation, also plays a crucial role. In healthy desire, dopamine is released in response to rewards, creating pleasure and reinforcing behaviors that led to those rewards. But in obsession, dopamine release becomes disconnected from actual reward. The brain releases dopamine in anticipation of reward, creating intense motivation and focus. But the reward itself, when obtained, produces less satisfaction than expected. This creates a cruel paradox. The pursuit is intensely motivated, but the achievement is disappointing, leading to another cycle of pursuit. This helps explain why obsessions are often not about pleasure. The gambler does not gamble because it feels good. Often, they hate the experience, feel ashamed, desperately want to stop. But the anticipation, the moment before the outcome is known, activates dopamine systems intensely. They are chasing not the win, but the neurochemical state of anticipation. The object of obsession is not the goal. It is the excuse to generate the neurochemical state that the brain has become dependent on. Research on addiction, which shares many neurological features with obsession, has revealed that chronic pursuit of an obsessive object actually changes brain structure. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for self-control, planning, and rational decision-making, shows reduced gray matter volume and decreased activity. The person literally loses the neural capacity for self-regulation. Meanwhile, the amygdala, involved in emotional responses and stress, becomes hyperactive, generating intense anxiety and craving. This creates a neurological imbalance. The emotional reactive parts of the brain dominate, while the rational regulatory parts weaken. The person knows their obsession is destructive. They can articulate rationally why they should stop. But knowing does not translate into doing, because the brain regions that would implement that knowledge have been weakened by the chronic stress and overstimulation of the obsessive cycle. The default mode network, the neural system active when we are at rest and engaged in self-referential thinking, also shows altered patterns in obsessive states. Normally, the default mode network allows for mind wandering, for reflection, for considering multiple perspectives. But in obsession, this network becomes rigid, dominated by thoughts related to the object of obsession. The person cannot daydream freely. Every mental wandering leads back to the same fixation. Neuroscience has also revealed the role of habit formation in obsession. The basal ganglia, which are crucial for learning habits and automatic behaviors, become hyperactive. What begins as a conscious pursuit gradually becomes automatized, requiring less and less conscious deliberation. The person no longer decides to engage in the obsessive behavior. The behavior happens automatically, triggered by specific cues, executed without conscious choice. This automatization is adaptive in healthy contexts. We want some behaviors to become automatic so we do not have to constantly think about them. But when destructive behaviors become automatic, we lose the opportunity for conscious intervention. The obsessive thought or action happens before conscious awareness can engage, before we can choose differently. The brain's stress response systems are also chronically activated in obsession. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which regulates our response to threat, remains in a state of heightened activation. Cortisol levels are elevated. The person lives in a constant state of physiological stress, which impairs cognitive function, reduces emotional regulation, and makes it even harder to break free from the obsessive pattern. Perhaps most significant is what neuroscience reveals about recovery. The brain retains plasticity, the ability to change. When obsessive behaviors are interrupted, when new patterns are practiced, the brain gradually rewires. The overactive circuits calm down. The underactive regions regain function. But this rewiring takes time, requires consistent practice, and often requires external support because the obsessed brain cannot easily regulate itself. The person needs help interrupting the automatic patterns long enough for new neural pathways to form. Beyond obsession, liberation, and integration. If obsession is so deeply wired into brain circuits, if it serves psychological functions, if it protects against unbearable truths, then what hope exists for liberation? This is the question that haunts anyone who has been trapped in obsessive patterns or watched someone they love consumed by them. The answer is not simple, and anyone who offers easy solutions has not understood the depth of the problem. Liberation from obsession begins not with fighting the obsession, but with understanding it. What is this obsession protecting you from? What would you have to face if you released it? What void would open up if you stopped filling your consciousness with this pursuit? These questions are terrifying because they point to the real problem, the one the obsession was designed to conceal. But until we face these questions, we remain trapped in treating symptoms while the disease continues. Jung's approach to obsession was through what he called circumambulation, a circular approach rather than a direct assault. You do not attack the obsession head-on. You circle around it, gradually getting closer to its center, understanding its symbolic meaning, recognizing what it represents. The person obsessed with cleanliness may need to explore their relationship to contamination, to shame, to the feeling of being fundamentally dirty or wrong. The person obsessed with a romantic partner may need to face their terror of being unlovable, their hunger for a love that would heal all wounds. This circling requires patience and courage. It means sitting with intense discomfort, without immediately seeking relief through the obsessive behavior. It means feeling what the obsession has been protecting you from feeling. This is why obsessions are so resistant to treatment. The alternative to obsession is not peace. It is, initially, intense anxiety, emptiness, the confrontation with denied truths. The obsession begins to look preferable to what lies beneath it. But this confrontation is necessary. The psyche will not release its grip on the obsessive object until it trusts that consciousness can handle what the obsession was protecting against. This trust must be earned through repeated experiences of tolerating the unbearable, of sitting with anxiety without seeking escape, of facing the void without immediately filling it. The practice of mindfulness, adapted from Buddhist psychology, offers tools for this work. Mindfulness teaches us to observe thoughts and urges without identifying with them, to create space between the obsessive thought and the compulsive action. The thought "I must check the door" arises, but between the thought and checking the door, there can be a moment of awareness. I am having the thought that I must check the door. I am not that thought. I am the awareness within which that thought appears. This distinction sounds simple but is profound in practice. It creates the possibility of choice where before there was only compulsion. The obsessive thought still arises, the urge still appears, but you are no longer completely identified with it. There is now a witness, a part of consciousness that can observe without being consumed. This witness is the beginning of freedom. But observation alone is not enough. We must also provide what psychologists call corrective emotional experiences. The obsessed person needs experiences that disprove the underlying beliefs driving the obsession. The person who believes they are unlovable needs experiences of being loved for who they are, not for their performance. The person terrified of chaos needs experiences of surviving disorder without catastrophe. The person who feels fundamentally contaminated needs experiences of acceptance that do not require perfect cleanliness. These experiences cannot be provided through argument or logic. They must be lived, felt in the body, encoded in neural circuits through repeated encounters with reality that contradicts the obsessive narrative. This is why relationships are crucial in healing obsession. Therapy, genuine friendship, authentic community. These provide the relational context in which new experiences can occur, where the person can risk letting go of the obsession and discover they survive, that something other than catastrophe occurs. The existential work is equally crucial. The person must confront the void that the obsession was filling. What is your life for, if not for this pursuit? Who are you, if not defined by this desire? These questions have no easy answers, but they must be asked and lived into. The person must discover or create meaning that is broader than the obsession, values that organize life in a different way, purposes that can withstand the loss of the obsessive object. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps, taught that meaning can be found even in suffering, even in limitation, even in the absence of what we desperately want. This meaning is not given. It must be created through how we respond to our circumstances, through the attitude we take toward what we cannot change. The person who releases obsession often does not do so because they found a better object. They do so because they found a different way of being that does not require objects to complete them. This is the deepest liberation. It is not the satisfaction of desire, but the transformation of the self that desires. The person discovers that they are not fundamentally incomplete, not fundamentally lacking, not fundamentally unworthy. The hole they were trying to fill through obsessive pursuit was not a real hole but a belief about themselves, a story they had internalized. And stories can be rewritten. The process is gradual. There will be relapses, moments when the old pattern reasserts itself with full force, when the person falls back into the obsessive loop. This is not failure. It is part of the spiral path of healing. Each relapse offers new information, reveals more of what was hidden, provides another opportunity to choose differently. The goal is not perfection but direction, not the elimination of obsessive thoughts but the gradual reduction of their power. There is also the recognition that some degree of obsessive tendency may remain. The neural pathways carved by years of obsession do not completely disappear, but they can be weakened through disuse while new pathways are strengthened. The person learns to recognize the signs, to catch themselves earlier in the cycle, to interrupt the pattern before it gains full momentum. They develop what psychologists call relapse prevention skills, strategies for managing triggers and high-risk situations. Conclusion: the psychology of obsession reveals the human capacity for both tremendous fixation and tremendous transformation. Obsession shows us how desire can turn against itself, how the pursuit of satisfaction can become the obstacle to satisfaction, how we can become imprisoned by our own hunger. But understanding this mechanism also points toward liberation. Obsession is not a character flaw or a moral failure. It is a psychological pattern that develops for reasons, that serves functions, that protects against truths too painful to face directly. To condemn the obsessed person is to misunderstand the nature of obsession. They are not weak or self-indulgent. They are trapped in a pattern that hijacks consciousness, that operates beneath awareness, that resists rational intervention. But obsession is also not destiny. The brain can change. Psychological patterns can be interrupted. New ways of being can be learned. Liberation requires understanding, patience, courage, support, and often professional help. It requires facing what the obsession protects against, tolerating the anxiety that the obsession relieves, sitting with the emptiness that the obsession fills. The person who emerges from obsession is not the same person who entered it. They have been changed by the journey, by the confrontation with their own depths, by the discovery of what they can survive. They have learned something essential about the nature of desire, about the difference between wanting and needing, about the ways we lie to ourselves, and the possibility of living in greater truth. Obsession is desire that has become divorced from reality, that has lost all proportion, that has consumed the person who once thought they controlled it. But beneath this madness lives a human being seeking something essential, however distorted the seeking has become. That essential need, safety, love, worth, meaning, is legitimate. The obsession is merely the wrong answer to a real question. Liberation comes when we can face the question directly, when we can acknowledge the need without displacing it onto impossible objects, when we can create meaning through who we are and how we live, rather than through what we possess or achieve or control. This is not the absence of desire. It is desire integrated with reality, proportionate to possibility, connected to genuine need rather than to fantasy. The journey through obsession and out the other side is one of the great transformative experiences available to human consciousness. It teaches us about the structure of our own minds, about the shadow we carry, about the defenses we construct, about the underlying needs that drive all human behavior. It teaches us compassion for ourselves and others, recognizing that we are all, in various ways, caught in patterns we did not choose and struggle to escape. We are not our obsessions. We never were. We are the consciousness that can witness obsession, that can recognize it as pattern rather than identity, that can choose moment by moment whether to feed it or to starve it, whether to believe its promises or to see through them. This consciousness, this witnessing awareness, is what remains when obsession finally releases its grip. And in that space, in that freedom from compulsion, we discover something we were seeking all along but in the wrong places. Not completion through an external object, but wholeness through integration of what we are. All of it, the light and the shadow, the desire and the fear, the hunger and the capacity to be satisfied. Call to action. If you recognize yourself in this exploration of obsession, if you see patterns you have lived or are living, know that recognition is powerful. Obsession thrives in darkness, in denial, in the pretense that everything is fine. By naming it, by seeing it clearly, you have already begun to loosen its grip. Subscribe to this channel if you seek content that explores the depths of human psychology without offering false comfort or easy answers, that respects the complexity of the human condition and invites you into genuine understanding. Share this with someone who might be struggling with obsessive patterns, who needs to know that they are not uniquely broken, that liberation is possible. Leave a comment sharing your reflections, your own experiences with obsession, your insights about desire and its distortions. This community exists for those willing to look honestly at the difficult aspects of human psychology, to face what is painful, to do the hard work of transformation. We are all vulnerable to obsession in its various forms. The question is whether we will face this vulnerability consciously or allow it to control us from the shadows. Remember, You are not your obsession. You are the awareness that can witness it, question it, and ultimately transcend it. The path is not easy, but it is possible, and you do not walk it alone.